the keepers of the unsound. The black scary lighthouse was not a monument to guidance, but a tomb for sound. For 10 years, Lachlan had kept the light, listening only to the wind and the surf. Then came Tug, fresh from the mainland, eager to escape the city's noise. Tadug was full of stories and songs. Lachlan was full of silence. On the third night, Tadgin noticed it, a low, almost subsonic thrumming that was never quite loud enough to complain about, but always present. It felt like a vast, cold machine turning endlessly beneath the sea. The hum, Lachlan finally admitted, without looking up from polishing the brass lens casing. His voice was flat, like a stone skipping once across a still pond. It's the island breathing, the deep pressure of the sea floor pushing against the rock. The sound began to infiltrate the silence between their words. Tadagi would stop mid-sentence, listening for the shift in frequency, the subtle difference between the engine's drone and the deeper organic throb of the island itself. It felt like a toothache in his deepest bone. Lachlan would simply stare at the shifting ocean, his silence heavier than the low-frequency drone. He never once looked Tadig in the eye when the subject came up, speaking only to the brass or the glass. He was already a part of the sound. Part 2, the resonation. The hum began to change. It started to feel less like a sound and more like a thought that wasn't Tadgi's own. It was a single, long, agonizing note of loss, reverberating deep in his chest. It felt like a memory of a disaster he hadn't lived through. He tried to talk about it. "Lachlan, I can't sleep. It's too loud. It feels like my own pulse is fighting it, like something is trying to remap the inside of my skull." Lachlan simply poured another cup of black coffee and stared at the empty space above Tadag's head. "You get used to the pitch," Lachlan murmured, stirring his coffee. "It settles into the cracks. It finds the empty spaces in your head and just sits there. Eventually, you forget what real silence sounds like, and you just become another vessel for the sound." Tadnug realized Lachlan wasn't ignoring him. He was protecting something. He had built a wall of routine and silence, an invisible skin against the auditory infection. The only way to survive the island was to become as cold and unyielding as the rock itself. One night, the hum sharpened, shifting from a low drone to a sustained, high-pitched ringing, like a massive, distant tuning fork had struck the tower's stone foundation. It was the sound of grief, too vast to belong to any single person, and now it was punctuated by an erratic, heavy clang. Part 3. The contagion. The vibration was physical now. Tadig would wake up with a tremor in his hands, unable to hold a cup of water steady. The sound wasn't in the air, it was in his nerves, his blood, rewriting the rhythm of his own heart to match the island's dying beat, or perhaps its desperate coded call. He tried to distract himself with the logs, the ship manifests, the mundane records of the lighthouse. But even the ink on the page seemed to shimmer with the frequency, and the logbook felt less like a history and more like a desperate, years-long cry for help. Lachlan never kept a proper journal. He kept only small, neatly folded slips of paper tucked into a tin box. Todd Heck found them, not words, but just lists of numbers, painstakingly written, crossing out one column and beginning another. Tadaki recognized the pattern. They were counts. Counts of the seconds between the light's rotation. Counts of the waves hitting the western wall. Crucially, counts of the interval between the big wave impact and the erratic clang. Lachlan was measuring the failure of an unseen mechanism. Tadug began his own regimen. He started counting the seconds between the light's rotation. He'd count from 1 to 20, then reset. If he lost the count, the hum would swell. The count was his only defense, and now his only key to unlock the older keeper's silence. Part 4. The rotation tadgi focused on the erratic clang. He correlated its timing with the tide charts. Lachlan wasn't waiting for the sound to stop. He was waiting for the perfect confluence, low tide and maximum wave refraction. A single, small window of calm water at the island's base. He began to fear the moments when the sound shifted, because that meant the water was changing, the opportunity was passing. The iron stairs felt like a winding chain to his execution, until he realized they were the route to a sub-basement he'd never seen. Tadeg found the key, hidden beneath a loose floorboard near Lachlan's bunk. It was far too large for any normal door. It was the key to a century of secrets, and as he gripped it, the low hum suddenly seemed to sharpen, directing his attention downward. The key fit the massive iron lock on a hatch in the cellar floor. Below it, a steep, wet staircase descended to a space outside the tower's blueprint, a maintenance room for the foundations, filled with antique, corroded equipment. The hum was deafening here. In the center of the room, bolted to the stone, was an immense, antique, deep-sea air pump, the kind used for early diving suits. Beside it was a small canvas bag containing a diagram of a decaying World War II-era hydrophone anchor whose fraying chain caused the clang. Part 5. The Salvation. He ran back up, the hum a frantic, accelerating beat against the tower's stone. The counting was losing its power. Then he looked at the tide gauge. 0. The sound died instantly. The silence was not the absence of a soul, but the momentary calm before the final snap. Tadug rushed out onto the rocks and saw Lachlan. The older man was not staring into the void. He was methodically donning the brass helmet of an antique diving suit, already weighted down with iron. He was not waiting for death. He was preparing for a final, solitary, desperate task. The chain. Lachlan's muffled voice came from inside the helmet. It has 10 minutes before the tide turns. The hydrophone will crash into the foundation. I need you to run the pump. I've kept the tower alive for 10 years. You'll keep me alive for 10 minutes. Tadeg ran back to the cellar, his arms screaming with the effort as he spun the air pump's heavy crank. He counted the rotations, not the light, his new rhythm, a fierce, physical battle against the rising tide. He was feeding life to the bottom of the ocean. The rope went slack. Tadnuk stopped pumping and ran back to the surface. Lachlan surfaced moments later, his helmet discarded, breathing raggedly but alive. He held up a massive, corroded chain segment. The black skerry was silent, a profound, perfect peace. They sat down, finally, two keepers in shared, earned quiet.